every banana skin that is out there, Trump or one of his close associates seems determined to slip up on it. And, if you slip on enough banana skins, you get into a real difficult problem. That is the issue. The fact that these people are so important to world stability and security, but they seem to be playing at being leaders rather than actually doing the job.
Hi, I'm Jo Crawford and welcome to Times Radio's Trump Report. Today I'm joined by former British Colonel and current military and security analyst Hamish de Bretton-Gordon. Thank you for joining me on the Trump Report today.
Pleasure. Thanks for having me on, Jo.
I think we need to start off by discussing this Signal group chat leak, don't you, Hamish? I mean, X was exploding with reaction to this story that was published by the Atlantic editor Jeffrey Goldberg, who appeared to be added to this group chat by Trump's national security advisor Mike Waltz, where senior US officials were discussing war plans to attack the Houthis, and those attacks did subsequently happen as a result. I mean, what was your initial reaction to this?
Well, I think like you, pretty surprised and exasperated. Really on two areas. I think, first of all, the security breach. Those of us in this world, we have Signal chat groups. But some years ago, the community realized that they are just insecure. So we only use them for administrative reasons, certainly not for operations. Most people move on to Viber and other areas, and actually WhatsApp, which is encrypted both ends, is far safer. So that was a lapse. It was then to understand that Steve Witkoff, who is who's Trump's envoy to Ukraine, was actually in Moscow at the time this group was set up. Now, he is a property developer, and one of the challenges we have with some of the people in the new administration is they're not trained in diplomacy, security, and politics. So if he had his phone in the Kremlin, which undoubtedly he did, one must assume that the Russians know absolutely everything that was on his phone, including all this diatribe on Signal. So they would have known a week ago. And on the face of it, so you might say, so what? But we're at the position of very delicate ceasefire and peace negotiations. Unfortunately, Steve Witkoff and even Pete Hegseth, the American Defense Secretary, appear to be more in the Putin camp than they are in the European camp. And when you're doing negotiations, if your enemy, and we're assuming that Putin is still our enemy, knows what you're thinking and what you're going to do, it puts you in a really weak position. And this is sort of personified today by the Russian negotiators in Saudi are now saying, actually, we want a lot more land in Ukraine. We're not happy with what we've got. And when you look at what was actually said in this Signal, pathetic Europe, bailing them out again, why should we do it? I sort of put my Kremlin Putin hat on and I'm sort of thinking, well, are the Americans going to come charging over the Atlantic to help Europe if we crack on? The assumption must be no. So on a whole host of issues, the security breach is one thing. The naivety of it is shocking. But what it hands the trump card to not overuse that vernacular, straight to Putin. And we're seeing it today unraveling almost directly or indirectly related to this security breach.
And as you just mentioned, there is that security risk there that potentially Moscow did get access to the information that was in this chat. I mean, the Atlantic, they did not reveal some information that was allegedly posted by Hegseth, as they said that if it was read by adversaries to the US, it could have been used to harm American military and intelligence personnel. But I mean, what risk does this already pose with the information that was published for the public to see? And then on top of that, with this unpublished information, what consequences would that have had to US security?
Let's assume the Russians know absolutely all of this chat. And it's not an assumption. I mean, having trained in counter-surveillance and being aware of counter-espionage, the Russians have this capability, absolutely. And when they realize that these key players, and these are the most powerful men in the US, command, if they're using Signal, you can just see them licking their lips. So they will know absolutely everything that's on that chat. and what other chats are going on in this. And what it does, when ambiguity and inconsistency, it might be very good if you're doing a business deal or buying a used car, but actually, when you're involved in world politics, when you're involved in trying to negotiate peace, if the person you're negotiating with knows exactly your position and what you're going to do, then they're in a really strong position. So I think that, to me, quite apart from the security, they can stop that absolutely now by getting people to switch off their phones, ditching Signal and going to somewhere else. There is, I can't see why these people are using insecure mobile phones to communicate. There are secure phones available, which one assumes that these guys would be using anyway. So it's in Congress. But again, I think it is because of their naivety and because they want to play everything out on social media. I am sure that X and other social media entrants are not available on secure mobile phones for very good reasons. So that's why people like Hesketh and Witkoff, who want to post all the time, are using these phones. But what they should realise is that it's opening them up completely. Your mobile phone not only pins you to a sort of a meter square slot in the world, it also, even if you turn it off, those clever people at the Russian Secret Service can listen to what you're saying. So, I mean, that is the concern, really, what it shows Russia, and it just gives them the advantage. So you can just see them sat down negotiating in Saudi at the moment, and the Russians saying, right, we want a lot more ground. Well, you're not going to have it. Well, hang on. We heard X, Y, and Z, talking about it the other day, saying that we would trade it. And I think one must look at what Putin's aims were in this invasion of Ukraine. His number one aim on the 24th of February 2022, his special military operation, his 3-week or 3-day or whatever it was to subjugate the whole of Ukraine and bring it back into Russia. His second aim was to decouple Europe from the US. And the last 2 or 3 weeks, particularly the last 24 hours, sort of brings one to the conclusion that second aim is almost achieved. And I think I've already said it, does Putin think America's going to use its military might to come and save Europe? One has to take from those signal messages that no, it doesn't, or certainly no, the current people running things don't do it. And you just know, if you're in Putin's position and you know that, and Putin thinks he's winning at the moment, let's not absolutely sort of discard that. He says he's advancing on a lot of fronts. When the so-called ceasefire on infrastructure was allegedly signed a few days ago, literally before the ink was dry, they'd attacked Ukraine's schools and infrastructure. So, we cannot believe a word they say. But if you think you're winning, and if you think that the main sort of speed bump, the main stop to you winning is the US, but now you realize that actually they're probably not going to do anything, then you're going to crack on. And I think that is the most worrying thing. Europe, we know that we know that Trump has believed that Europe have paid lip service to defense, and he's probably right there. And we've all woken up. It's now going to be a race to see whether the European countries can build a strategic military force, a conventional deterrent that will stop Putin going any further. And at the moment, without the US, that is very much in the balance.
I'd like to pick you up on that point about Europe as well, because obviously from a security perspective as well, for allies of America, like Britain, for example, we share a lot of high-level intelligence with the US. I mean, do you think that allies of the US in Europe at the moment, they're a bit scared now about sharing this information with America for fear that it may be compromised?
Well, that is a really good question and a really good point. We have something called the Five Eyes community, which is the US, Canada, the UK, Australia, New Zealand, and ourselves. And that is the most important intelligence sharing network. And actually, it's one area where Britain really punches very, very strongly. And the US would be in a difficult position if Britain withheld our intelligence from that. So, yeah, it is a huge concern. Of course, Canada is, at arms against the US as well, because Trump said he wants Canada to become the 51st state. So there is a lot at stake here. I certainly hitherto, the intelligence communities of the Five Eyes, whatever is happening above the surface, have worked very, very well and closely together. And it was only before Christmas that the head of MI6, the UK intelligence service, and the head of the CIA, the American intelligence service, gave a joint brief about Russian espionage potential across Europe and in the States. But I am sure that in London and in Washington, those services are, I'm sure they're still speaking very much directly, because, at the working level, things will be operating as they should do. But there will be huge concern that these people should, if you are the defense secretary, you should have access to all your country's intelligence. Now, it doesn't quite work like that, but one can see that there will be some concerned discussions happening, and particularly between the British intelligence service and the Americans, there will be people in, Vauxhall Cross who might be questioning whether certain bits of intelligence they have, they want to share it with the current US administration, because we are all realizing that the defense of Europe is going to be absolutely Europe's problem, and we can't rely on the US to help us anytime soon.
We're not expecting to have an official statement from Monday's talks between the US and Russia. That's according to the Kremlin. That's what they say, following talks in Saudi Arabia. We also heard that there was a brief conversation there between Kyiv and the US following these talks with the US and Russia. I mean, what do you expect we can hear from that?
Bits are flowing out. I think, first of all, it would be very interesting when the US wakes up today, what the reaction is to these security breaches. And we have seen before with the use of social media by the White House that if stuff goes down badly, pretty soon, a counter narrative is given. It might be diametrically opposed to what they said, but they seem to have no problem contradicting themselves. So, firstly, it would be interesting to see later today and tomorrow what the White House is saying about these leaked signal messages. When it comes to ceasefire negotiations, it's going to be a really tricky time. I think Putin and the Russians think they're very much on the front foot at the moment. Ukraine is absolutely digging in and doing what it can. When it comes to a ceasefire on infrastructure, actually, it's the Russians who would gain most. Their hydrocarbon industry is the backbone of their economy at the moment, and Ukraine has really dented it quite severely. Whereas Russia has tried to switch the lights out and turn the heating off for the last 3 winters in Ukraine and has failed. So there may be a bit of give and take here. But I do not see any way at the moment that Putin is going to sign up to a ceasefire that's going to stop his forward movement. Why would he? He's making progress, and he thinks he's going to win. And we know that when America turned off its intelligence assets providing Ukraine support, that had a profound effect. When America turned off its military capability. And when you dig into what's said in this signal message, and the head of the US military secretary of state is saying what he's saying, I wouldn't be confident that the flow of HIMARS missiles and ATACMS missiles are going to continue. Again, that all puts the emphasis on Putin. So until the dust settles, as it were, on this, I wouldn't expect to see any movement by the Russians and Putin at all.
When Trump was asked about this leak yesterday, he said that he was unaware, but in its wake, it suggested that potentially heads will roll as a result of this. Some legal experts are already suggesting that Watts, for example, he may have broken espionage acts, among other laws. There's also questions there about Hegseth denying that there was these conversations happening about war plans, even though the White House has confirmed that it did happen. I mean, what do you expect to happen there? And then secondly, how do you think that will impact ceasefire negotiations between Ukraine and Russia too?
Well, yeah, it'll be very, very interesting to see. Defense secretaries in the US come and go pretty quickly, and when Trump was last in, he moved them around. So it's one never knows who Trump is beholden to, and that seems to affect his decision making. This security breach, presumably, the people responsible for it would be, the head of the CIA, the FBI, and the head of the U.S. Defense. In other words, Hesketh and the others. So, yeah, in theory, they should be sacked. Whether they will be or not, we should wait and see. But it's the way that business is done in this new administration on open source social media, which is all very good when you're flogging houses and cars, but when you're trying to fight a war or prevent a war, it's absolutely horrendous. And yeah, those responsible should roll. I mean, ultimately, of course, it comes back to the president, but the president and some of his close associates seem to be very good at not being held to account for anything.
A lot of Trump's hires for his administration, they're seen as outsiders. They lack that federal government experience. And this sort of falls into Trump's messaging of bringing new people in to drain the swamp, as he says, that us versus them narrative. But, The Spectator wrote today that this leak, it reminds us, as they say, that the free world is not being led by serious people. I mean, do you think that this will have lasting reputational damage, not just amongst American citizens, but also against, American adversaries, for example, who may see, look, this government is run by people who don't have that experience.
Oh, entirely. Unfortunately, when Trump drained the swamp, he drained all the expertise and experience. And you need that. You absolutely need people who know what they're talking about. You need people who understand espionage, counter-espionage, surveillance, counter-surveillance. If you don't, you get this complete cock-up that we've now had. And it wouldn't be so bad, but it's the fact it's the most powerful people in the world with the most powerful weapons who really can change the destiny of history. So I think it really, confidence-wise, us as alleged allies, we're pretty concerned, but more it's the potential adversaries. We've talked about Putin, but just think what they're thinking in Beijing and and North Korea, let alone Tehran and Iran. So yeah, it's if you are going to be the world's leader, you've got to act like it. Acting like some two-bit salesman is it's just the potential, and one doesn't want to there's lots of talk about war in Europe and World War III. Now these world wars generally happen when a bunch of circumstances come together that on their own would have been difficult. But if you put a lot of difficult situations together, you can create a catastrophe. That's what happened in the First World War, the Second World War. At the moment, every banana skin that is out there, Trump or one of his close associates seems determined to slip up on it. And, if you slip on enough banana skins, you get into a real difficult problem. That is the issue. The fact that these people are so important to world stability and security, but they seem to be playing at being leaders rather than actually doing the job.
Well, it's going to be interesting to hear what the president has to say about it today. Hamish de Bretton-Gordon, thank you so much for joining me in the Trump Report today.
Pleasure.